Hello and welcome. This is Down to Astro. I'm Chani Nicholas.
I'm Thea Anderson.
And I'm Eliza Robertson.
In this podcast, we talk about how the astrology of the moment is landing in real time. We talk about what is coming up that we've got our eye on. And we also give a little bit of homework to help you understand how your own chart works and how to work with these moments. All right, y'all. Where do we begin? We are recording this on November 30th.
Should we touch base on some of the events that have unfolded since we last recorded an episode? Because I do feel like there are some threads.
Yeah, there are some really striking ways in which the astrology and world events have been happening at the same time. Do you want to start with the Mars-Saturn of it all, or is there something further back?
Well, there's the Mars cazimi is also interesting to me.
Right.
I want to start there.
We talked about the Mars cazimi in the last episode. Yeah. Okay.
So I'll start with the story. So on the day of the cazimi, which was November 17th, Sam Altman, who is the executive, like the CEO of OpenAI, which, runs ChatGPT, was ousted by the board of his own company. And within a very short period of time, most of the company, there are like 700 employees, so at least 700 employees wrote a letter and said that they would leave OpenAI and follow Sam Altman wherever he went. And so this kind of like theatrical, really public ousting was just such a shocking display of a Mars cazimi in Scorpio, because it had the signatures of kind of going behind someone's back. The board said that they didn't trust Sam Altman. So that was really interesting. There was these themes of trust and shadiness, the sort of the way that it even happened. People were shocked. And it was interesting because it reverberated even beyond sort of Silicon Valley into the mainstream news. And it was a very hectic period of time for like 5 days. There was this kind of like open question of what is the future of AI if Sam Altman isn't leading it, and who's going to take the reins of it and who's going to own it. So one of the interesting things about the way I saw it playing out is, so much of this is about money and power and billions of dollars of technology. And also, who's going to like make these decisions comes down. There's like, other signatures around it. I think other planetary signatures I'm thinking about next year with, Pluto and Aquarius. But this is really interesting because the Mars cazimi really kind of, well, Eliza, you'll get into the transits that Sam was happening, but I was like really stunned with the power moves that happened. And when then Sam came back and was reinstated, like now what's happening, even the news as of today, is that, they're going to reconfigure the board. And so I was really shocked in the way that like he was ousted, but he's back with even more power and is going to have the last say.
And like the chess moves of moving the board around. And,
all strategy.
Yeah.
Well, and this is, we spoke to this in the last episode because one of the ways that we framed this specific cazimi, since Mars is technically a malefic planet, but also I would argue cazimis in general, the planet enters the heart of the sun. That's what the word cazimi means from the Arabic word. It means in the heart of the sun. And we can imagine that as being this purification by fire, literally. And
by being fired.
Oh my gosh, I didn't even think about that literally. But exactly. Sam fired from his own company that he founded and is the CEO of, which I didn't even know that could happen, first of all.
Oh, yes.
This is how little I know.
Yes. Oh my God, you're hilarious. You're such an astrologer, mystic, educator. Yes. There's a show called Succession that's all about it. Anyways.
That's what I kept thinking of.
Succession. Yeah.
I couldn't get.
That's why you have a board, because the board's supposed to check you, right? So nonprofits have a
Checkmate.
board, like a lot of companies have boards, so that if something goes awry with the leader, the board is able to check the balance of power, although it doesn't usually happen.
So that makes sense. But what happened in this case is all of Sam Altman's, let's say, skeptics, or just simply the people that had, it sounds like, a more moderate and reserved approach to AI.
Mm-hmm.
The end result is that they were purified from the board. So everyone who had led to everyone who had initially voted to oust him has now been expunged from the board, which is indeed a purification, depending on, whose perspective you're viewing it from. And I'm sure, these purifications aren't necessarily pleasant in the moment. Again, it's this fire blazing.
Does this mean that we're even more, this is even worse for humanity because anybody that was kind of more moderate has left this very powerful company?
So this is the debate, because Sam Altman publicly is very moderate. Is moderate himself. He's been termed as an optimist, but he's very careful to address the concerns around AI. That said, there were people on his board who were deeply concerned that he was too optimistic, too positively biased towards the boon that AI has to offer humanity, and perhaps not concerned enough about the detriment it could pose. Right. And so I think this is one reason why I find this moment so pivotal, is because as we move into the astrology of next year and in the coming few years, we have these major changes, which we'll talk about this in another episode, but they all point to accelerated technological breakthroughs. Yeah. And honestly, in the past, that hasn't always boded well for humans.
Yeah.
For human life.
Because of the humans ushering it in. Okay, so there's also something that really fascinating happened in his actual chart because of this Mars cazimi fell in his chart in a really wild way.
Yeah, so we don't have timed birth data for Sam Altman, so I want to flag that right now. We don't know that. All that means is we don't know his ascendant, so we don't know where in his birth chart this fell, but we do know his birth date, which is April 22nd, 1985, and so we know where the planet. What did you say?
I said, "Oh my God, he's so young." Okay, go.
Leading the charge into the future.
I mean, all of the tech bros are millennials.
Yeah. I'm sure he's old for tech bros, and probably all of the Gen Z are like, "What are you talking about? He's ancient." Okay, sorry, go.
So we don't know where in his birth chart this aspect falls, but we do know where the planets are located. And he happened to be born, I think, just shortly after, but the aspect is still very striking in his chart, shortly after an opposition between Mars and Taurus and Saturn and Scorpio. So Mars and Saturn, again, they're the two malefic planets. They're, it's not that they don't have constructive offerings for us, but we tend to feel those oppositions in our natal chart and also by transit when they happen as being challenges we need to work through and learn from rather than as gifts or like moments of smooth sailing. So he has this opposition baked into his natal chart, and it was activated within 1 or 2 degrees by the Mars cazimi. So the Mars cazimi happened, I think, within about 1 degree of his natal Saturn, which is opposing his natal Mars.
So he was having a natal Mars opposition, or
yes,
opposition, Mars opposition. And I think I'm like, Michael Jordan has that opposition.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know
so
that.
What it does is it makes someone really good at being determined and also going to war in whatever kind of sense that is for them. Like if you listen to Michael Jordan, if you watch his documentaries, if there's a million of them, there's a really good one that goes through his whole career. Every time he got on the court, he was like, who am I going to be? And he just made someone his opposition. And that's what fueled him. And it's like such a Mars-Saturn opposition thing. It's like there's always this tension. But so he has that within him. And I would say because he's so successful, that probably works for him, that Mars-Saturn opposition. It makes things incredibly challenging, but it's also like up for the challenge. Or I guess that's the question when you find something like that in somebody's chart, is like what's really hard for them, what's oppositional for them, but also like how do they have the capacity, especially when it's in fixed signs, to just dig in and no matter what, win. And so the Mars opposition in his chart, the transiting opposition, but the Mars on his Saturn is just like, oh, you think you're going to oust me? Watch. And then does the whole other thing. But of course, again, the implications for us, this interesting astrology, and then we have to look at the implications for us.
Really succinctly, like even just the Mars opposite Saturn, willing to go up against the institution or tradition and buck the system.
Yes.
Feels very much that signature as well, which is playing out.
Yeah. Okay, so upcoming, we're just looking at like a really short period of time. Well, I think we should also mention that we did go through a Mars-Saturn-square over the course of this last weekend. So what was the exact date of that? Does anybody have that on hand? We're talking
the 25th. It was November 25th.
So
Mars entered Sag on the 24th and then squared Saturn the next day.
Right. So anytime, I say this often in your readings, but anytime, or in the podcast, but anytime we've got Mars, Saturn conjunction, opposition, or square, we know that we're going to be in a moment that feels challenging or where something gets halted. And so one of the things that was kind of wild for me to see, that Mars is a planet of war, Saturn is the planet of boundaries or halting or saying no, is that we have had a temporary ceasefire at the exact same time in Gaza. So that was, I was like, oh, well, that's actually, we need a permanent ceasefire forever. But that is actually a positive way in which the Mars-Saturn, I've seen kind of how it has kind of played out. We had a lot of Mars-Saturn stuff during COVID that was very telling and very, wildly, succinctly on point. But that was what happened over the weekend. And then Thea was saying, I was talking about the Venus, then the planet of consensus and justice and equality and fairness and art and femmes and a lot of other things. Venus has also just gone over the South Node, which is where we had the mid-October eclipse, which was happening at the same time as the first eclipse we've had near the South Node in Libra in a couple decades. And of course, it happened a week after the October 7th events. And so it was a very devastating, harrowing, it's been time, but, through an astrological lens, eclipse season. And so when I was looking at that, I was like, oh, there'll be something that reverberates from the eclipse in mid-October to Venus going over that South Node point, because it's referring back to something that's kind of already happened in a way, because it's also the ruler of Venus. So while we've been doing that, there's a hunger strike going on at the Capitol. There have been, yesterday was an International Day of Solidarity with Palestine, which is when Venus actually went over that South Node. There were many calls not to buy or consume over the course of Black Friday here in the States. So there was this like South Node themes of decrease and not doing something to try to rebalance the scales of justice. But then Thea had an amazing point, which was, as this was happening, we kept hearing
the words that are very resonant with the South Node. And so with Venus, whose aim is to bring peace and justice, and also as the negotiation and release of hostages, it just seemed very telling that we were talking about release and negotiation in terms of like in the process of to be able to create like the ceasefire and how that's all intermingled with the truce and the ceasefire and the release of hostages.
Because the South Node is a point of release.
Exactly. Thanks, Chani. Yeah, the South Node is a point of release and letting go. And so there was literally an exchange, a letting go for the purpose of peace, which is a Libra signification.
Right. And I'll just say that at the same time, Israel was arresting massive numbers of Palestinians. And so it's not like, what was happening is, I don't think the Israeli government or regime is actually trying to get to peace. But
yeah, that was also what I meant to mention is also it's kind of like a Venus at the South Node feels like a sort of debilitation. So not able to like make everything better, but like here's one thing.
Right.
And that sort of decrease moment.
Right.
But it's like, just to add to that, it's funny with Venus because Venus is in its sign right now that it rules. So Venus is actually very dignified, but then it's next to the South Node, which, as you say, it's a debility. So it's both and I agree. This isn't the answer totally. I mean, it's not because it's not a permanent ceasefire because we're not we're not out of the woods yet. At the same time, this pause has like just at least created such a necessary just break in like all of the devastation and the violence.
Yeah.
And what I would add, a couple things. One, in the terms of the hostage release, one of them, this is just in terms of the literal what Venus represents, the terms are to release women and children first, generally. So Venus ruling women, like literally releasing women. That feels very Venus on the South Node.
Yeah.
But then secondly, this is just a point that for anyone listening who wants to dig deeper into the astrology and the way that rulership works, to just bridge together everything we've just talked about, Mars and Saturn right now are both in Jupiter ruled signs. So Mars is in Sagittarius and Saturn is in Pisces. Both of these signs are ruled by Jupiter. Whereas Jupiter right now, it's in Taurus. And stick with me if you're listening, because this is a thread of rulership. But Taurus is a sign ruled by Venus. So Venus is considered to be the final dispositor. This is a more technical term, but it's like all of these planets, if you follow the chain of rulership, they lead back to Venus in Libra, in its sign that it rules, but next to the South Node. And when you think of the word dispositor, it means like it disposes the planets to act in a certain way. So I wonder if this is one reason, because Mars-Saturn squaring each other, that can be catastrophic. That can feel catastrophic. And what we've seen, it's not the final answer. We need more, but it was at least, for me, it was better than I was expecting in terms of the conflict.
That's such a great point that Venus was then in charge of the conflict of the Mars-Saturn, and that there was a release as Venus was going through that situation. Okay. Should we move on to upcoming?
Yeah.
Okay. Upcoming, we have a Mercury retrograde. I see this Mercury retrograde in two very distinct compartments. There's the beginning of it, there's the first part of it, and then there's the second part of it. And the first part of it is actually, I think, going to be really helpful in some kind of way, or at least it looks like one of the best kind of setups that a Mercury retrograde can have. And then it's going to be disastrous. I mean, it's going to be in one of the most challenging setups, literally, that it can be in the second half. So a Mercury retrograde at the end of the year, I actually love it. I am not mad at it because we're not supposed to be like, trying to push everything through and move everything forward at the end of the year. Like, can we have a minute at the end of the year to just let things be retrograde? Can we be reflective? That's what we do anyways at the end of the year. We look back. So this Mercury retrograde seems to be very like, okay, that's on par. Traveling might be a little bit more challenging. But again, I do think that a lot of the December part of the Mercury retrograde is going to be not as bad as it could be. And buying stuff, if you're somebody who buys stuff, then good luck to you. But also the beginning part is not as bad. So let's talk about actual dates of the Mercury retrograde. Mercury stations retrograde on December. Does anybody have it?
12th.
12th. Thank you. December 12th. Okay. So right before Mercury stations retrograde on December 7th, it makes a trine to Jupiter, which is good news. And it is helpful, buoyant, optimistic thinking or perspective or planning. It's going to circle back. It's going to station retrograde, and then it's going to move back into that trine with Jupiter, which is lovely. It's like backing into good news or backing into a little bonus. And that's going to happen on December 15th. So I love this beginning period, actually. It's like, what is good? What is helpful? What actually opens me up? What gets me thinking in different ways? And then I'm going to go back to it. I'm not mad at that. We're going to circle back around one more time to that in January 19th. So there's something that happens December 7th, December 15th, and then January 19th in a part of your chart that contains Capricorn. And so it's good constructive wisdom. It's good constructive thought. It's good constructive review and fixing and tinkering and figuring out what wasn't working and what will. Who wants to take on the devastating part of the Mercury retrograde? Eliza, you were particularly perturbed by it. So why don't you talk about Mercury?
I love how you set this up, Chani. You're like, unless you buy things or travel during the holiday season, which no one does. It's never a time where people buy things or travel. You're fine.
It'll be totally cool.
I don't want to scare anyone, but I looked at this astrology and was like, I'm not going home. I'm staying in Montreal. And honestly, actually, I want to offer to people, there is a beautiful Cancer full moon that happens, I think, is it the 26th?
The 26th. Yeah.
Yeah. So this to me, I was like, okay, travel mayhem. Staycation looks really good.
I will say I am going to travel. We are going to travel.
Fun.
Yeah. So, like I'm not heeding the advice. But I'll also say like the solstice looks gorgeous. I think the solstice is really beautiful.
It's also cazimi.
Yeah.
Yes.
Solstice.
Right. And right before everything goes haywire.
Oh my God. Like, so the 21st and into the 22nd, like part of the 22nd, 21st, 22nd is beautiful, beautiful astrology, I think. And then it goes weird.
Yeah.
So as
Can
of
you
the
say
22nd,
why it's beautiful?
Because we're having the solstice. So no matter what hemisphere you're in, the solstice is an energetic point because it's said to be a 0 degree of Capricorn, right? So we're having the Capricorn solstice, winter solstice in the north, summer solstice in the south. Doesn't matter, either place. When the sun moves into 0 degrees of a cardinal sign, it's either the equinox or the solstice. And that means that there is a change of season and there's something new. There's a beginning, there is an initiation of something. And so there's this feeling of being galvanized in some kind of way, energized, and there's a shift, right? There's literal shift in weather, in light patterns, we can say for sure, whether we don't know anymore, but light patterns for sure. And in the north, this is the rebirth of the sun told through so many different cultures and through so many different time periods. At the same time, Mercury retrograde is making a conjunction with the sun, which is just in its rebirth. And that is a kind of moment of clarity and insight for Mercury retrograde. So it's this double kind of meaning of a sense of rebirth and clarity. And I think it's something we should bask in because then Mercury moves into Sag and starts to make a mess of things right after that. But I don't think it'll get messy for at least a couple days. Eliza, for those of you who are listening, Eliza just gave me major side eye. Okay, I'll eat my words. I'm sure I will. I always do.
I think it feels like it feels like Cinderella, and then the clock strikes midnight.
Yes.
And
oh my God, that's such a good.
As soon as Mercury retrogrades back into Sagittarius, which is its sign of detriment, it's immediately walking into a square with Neptune.
Yes, but it doesn't get there until.
Not exactly.
It doesn't get there exactly until when?
Until
January.
Like December
the 28th or something.
Right, December.
Because it's gonna meet up with Mars.
Yeah.
And that's that part that feels.
What day is that?
The 26th. There's Mercury retrograde and Sag square Neptune, the planet of illusion and
delusion too.
Delusion. Is this really happening? Should I make a plan based on this? Probably not. And then it's going to conjoin Mars. And that feels like territory that I think that
dicey.
Dicey. And it's mutable. So it just feels like a lot of information, but sort of ungrounded and could be prickly in some way.
It feels spicy.
Yeah.
Honestly, it feels like
hot sauce?
A really bad case of diarrhea, but in the world.
Okay.
I mean, Mercury conjunct Mars square Neptune. Like, It'll be fine. But but I think like in terms of advice for people, just going into it with a really healthy sense of humor and leaving, like we always say, leave incredibly wide margins if you are traveling. Hopefully by that point you're like where you're going to be and you can just get into fun debates with your family.
I do want to clarify one thing, if that's okay. Chani, I think I heard you say December 15th, it makes the trine to Jupiter, Mercury, but I think it's December 18th.
Oh, thank you. I can't read my own writing. You're right. December 18th. December 7th, December 18th, and January 19th are the good Mercury pre, during, and post retrograde trines to Jupiter. Those are great. Like, especially the January 19th is a great day to make an announcement. Okay. So we are saying that there's a gorgeous Cancer full moon on the 26th, but that's happening the same time as there's a Mercury square to Neptune. So it's going to be challenging for conversations. So we're talking December 25th, 26th, big feelings about home, big feelings about family, big feelings about where we belong, big feelings about connection in a lot of ways. But it's a very fertile full moon. So there's just so many good things that are happening. And at the same time, there's this kind of clusterfuck of information and conversations of the Mercury, Mars, square Neptune of it all. And both things can be true at the same time. You can have this experience of feeling cozy and home and connected to family and loved up and nurtured at the same time as being frustrated about something and maybe being challenged in terms of a direction or two. So 26th and 27th are super challenging for travel, conversations, buying, selling things. Don't do it. I wouldn't do any kind of magical practices on those days because Mercury's the ruler of that. And it's just like a little too messy.
Haywire.
And also, what'd you say?
Haywire.
And then it kind of like then we're in like a messy Mercury retrograde territory for, I say, until about January 9th for sure, 10th to be safe.
And just to be clear to folks, Mercury stations direct on New Year's Day, so on January 1st. So there will be, I think, some relief, but it's not really out of the murk.
No, because then it has to square Neptune one more time.
Yeah.
And that's January 9th, I believe. And so not until January 10th are we like past some of that. And I also, I'm not mad at it. Like, I don't, I know people have to do their thing. We at the Chani app, the company, we close for the first 2 weeks, the last 2 weeks of December and the first 2 weeks of January. So nobody has to worry about that, at least at the company. But I mean, cross our fingers, I'm knocking everything.
Except for the CX team.
Yeah. And so there's that thing of like, can you go slow? Can you decrease volume? Can you do work that doesn't have to rely on specifics and details and can be a little bit blurry, can be a little bit more about a vision or a fantasy or an imagining of something? Can you be a little less intense on yourself and driven? Because then after like January 10th, we're in some phenomenally like charged and energized astrology and even before that, by like January 4th, I think. But if we really want to be cautious, we wait until about January 10th. But then we are in Mars, Capricorn, December, beginning of the year, like the last like after that first week and a half in January, it's just such a gorgeous start to the year.
I agree.
There's so much motivation. Yeah. There's so many ways in which we can get stuff done and win in a lot of really fun and like grounded kind of ways.
Yeah. And I was also too thinking about Mars just like getting out of under the sun's beams and becoming a morning star. And in exalted in Capricorn, it feels so victorious. Like, listen, I got through the messiness. I got through the square to Neptune. I got through my purification moment, even back in November. And like, here's what I'm able to do now in a really practical way. So
I love that. When does it become morning star?
I gotta look it up.
But it's in that kind of time period where it's exalted.
Yeah.
Okay. Do we want to say anything else about this?
All I want to say, in case I was too negative, I think
by January 9th, it's 15 degrees away from the sun.
Oh.
So loving the January 9th kind of, January 10th kind of moment. January 9th is when Mercury squares Neptune for the last time. So we're clearing up that mess for the last time. Mercury is direct at that point. But then by the 10th, it's like morning star, exalted Mars, Mercury moving out of the confusion and going forth and prospering.
all I was just going to say is that I do think even though Mercury in Sagittarius can be messy, it's also really inspired and like open-minded.
Yeah.
And I do think there's a potential for, it might be a comedy of errors.
Yeah.
But I think we can learn something. I think we can laugh a lot. It's not gruesome the way sometimes astrology can be gruesome. It's just a little...
It's messy.
It's messy.
It's messy, and there can be misconceptions really easy because Mars is there, so it can make us hot-headed and hot-tempered, and then Neptune will obscure facts and details. So just, Sag wants to go fast. Just slow it down. Be like, is this true? Let me look that up again. Let me actually be like, do I need to say this thing now? Again, it'll be happening during that big full moon in Cancer, so people's feelings will be right there, I think. And so just like being able to pause and be like, well, let me just rethink this. But again, not trying to get anywhere or do anything quite specific. I can't believe we're traveling during this time. Okay.
So what does it mean if you have Mercury retrograde in your birth chart?
What does it mean? Does anybody here have that signature?
That would be me.
Do you find Mercury retrogrades easier because you have Mercury retrograde in your birth chart? Everyone always asks me this.
I don't think that that's true.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, and then also this is where we're talking about, like, not all Mercury retrogrades are created equal.
Right.
And so I tend to have the experience of I might recognize like this sort of disarray or things I have to go back and reflect and retrace my steps. I do that in my life and in my working life.
Yeah.
But you know what? This is what I could tell people when everyone's freaking out. I'm like, life is a spiral. It's not a line. I'm living proof. So let's
You are incredibly
together.
patient. Yes. Yeah. You are so patient and diligent. You also have a signature that I would say, because can I say the signature that you have? So Thea also has Mercury square Saturn, which gives her an ability to pause and think and take her time and really like consider what it is she wants to say. She's incredibly poised, incredibly fair, and incredibly like measured as a very deep thinker. And I also think it's what makes you such an incredible astrologer, because Saturn is the planet of time and timekeeping. And your Mercury is always like, what's the time?
It is.
Yeah.
All of that. I feel like you just read me. I don't need to say anything else. But I do appreciate having the time to contemplate. And that can be hard. And an urgency kind of, the world that we live in is like, we need a decision now. And I'm like, what Saturn has asked of my Mercury is to take the time.
And I think you're a really good leader in that way, is that you demonstrate how to do that. You're never going to the hot take of it all. You are very considerate. And I think that that's one of the more beautiful ways in which a Mercury Saturn aspect can work. And so you might want to go look at your chart. Go look at your chart in the Chani app and see, do you have Mercury retrograde? We should take a survey. Because a lot of people with Mercury retrograde in their chart tell me that Mercury retrogrades aren't hard for them. But I think what's really important is like, what kind of Mercury retrograde were you born under? So see if you have Mercury retrograde. They happen 3 times a year. It's very common to have Mercury retrograde in your chart. Just also know that. And then see, do you have a Mercury Saturn aspect, since we just talked about that a little bit, and see if it makes you a thinker that is deep, and maybe in the world you're called slower or something, or you feel like everyone's rushing you or hurried to make something. But actually the incredible gift of that is to contemplate and actually think deeply and be able to even maybe give yourself a little bit of space within to do that. And if you don't get that, it's not going to feel good.
Can I also just offer one thing that I've noticed with client charts as well as certain celebrity charts with Mercury retrograde? Thea, I don't know if this will resonate with you at all, so you can tell me if it doesn't. But I've noticed, because when a planet is retrograde, we can turn it inward in a way. That planet is facing inward more than outward. And Mercury is a planet that we associate with, yes, communication, but also learning. And I've noticed a lot of Mercury retrograde natal people are autodidacts. Like they teach themselves something. They teach themselves their craft. They're really good at like going out and finding the information and not necessarily relying on other teachers. So I think that can be a gift of that aspect in the natal chart. This is very anecdotal. It's just from like working with clients that I've noticed that. But for what it's worth,
people will appreciate that. Thea's also an incredible citationist, though, too. Like you can be like, "What did Valens say about?" And she'll be like, "Bloop, bloop, bloop," and pull it up, and
but then I'm like, why did I waste all that time doing that?
It's impressive.
It's impressive.
It sounds very impressive, and it adds clout to what you're saying.
Yeah, I do love that.
Don't stop.
We appreciate.
Speaking of time.
Yes. Okay. Hey, we're at time. All right, y'all. Thank you so much. That was, I'm terrified. And I will report back to tell you how disastrous our travels were.
It'll be great.
It'll be great. It'll be great. I am looking forward to the moon, the full moon, though, on the 26th. Let's all cry together.
Okay. Make a date.
All right, y'all. Thanks so much. We will be back in January. We'll be back to talk about an exalted Mars or something. Yeah. We'll also be back to talk about the year ahead. We do have an episode that we will release about the year ahead, 2024, and the things we're excited about, the things we have our eye on, and the things we are holding with a lot of spaciousness. All right, y'all. Bye for now.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.